Democrats held a news conference this morning to criticize Speaker John Boehner and House Republicans. They say not enough is being done to reduce federal spending or repealing the new health care law. From the National Press Club, this is a little more than an hour.
Good morning. My name is Matt Reister, and I'm a volunteer and a supporter of the Tea Party's Freedom Jamboree. It's coming up October 1 and 2 in Kansas City, and we're excited to gather here today. I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce to you each speaker who will be coming up. They'll remind you of who they are when they step to the podium. And after that, I'm going to read a statement from Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, and then we'll get going with the other speakers. Thanks again for your time today. Our first speaker will be William Temple, who is the chair of the Tea Party Founding Fathers. He's chairman of the Freedom Jamboree and Tea Party National Straw Poll Convention, which I mentioned already will be held in Kansas City in October. He was Time Magazine's face of the Tea Party and leader of 1.9 million Tea Partiers who marched on Washington against Obamacare in September of 2009. He's a veteran of the Secret Service, the Pentagon, and a Vietnam combat veteran with the U.S. Army. That's William Temple. Second speaker will be Joseph Farah, and he is the editor and founder and chief executive officer of WND.com and WND Books, and he is a nationally syndicated columnist with Creators News Service and author of the Tea Party Manifesto and other books. Our third speaker will be Bryant Wesbury, and Bryant is the chief economist for First Trust Advisors in Wheaton, Illinois. He's the former chief economist for Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Congress, and he's a member of the Academic Advisory Council of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Daniel J. Mitchell, Senior Fellow of the Cato Institute and a former economist for the U.S. Senate Finance Committee. Fifth, we have Reverend C.L. Bryant. He's the director of the Tea Party Founding Fathers. He's a member of the Red River Tea Party in Shreveport and Bossier Tea Party and Tea Party Patriots, a fellow at Freedom Works, and former president of the NAACP in Garland, Texas. He's a documentary producer, and you can find out about that at www.runawayslavemovie.com. He's a Baptist minister and founder of OneNationBackToGod.com. That is Reverend C.L. Bryant. And finally, we have Bob Vander Plaats, who is the vice chair of the Tea Party National Convention. He was the Tea Party's 2010 candidate for governor in the state of Iowa. And Bob is the CEO and president of an Iowa-based organization called the Family Leader. Before I turn it over to William Temple, I'm going to read a statement that we were given by Michelle Bachmann in lieu of her absence. The Tea Party is everyday Americans, and everyday Americans want Congress to stop frittering around the edges of our government spending crisis with small cuts. They don't want the debt ceiling raised, and they are demanding that Washington live within its means. I'm not able to be with you today at today's Tea Party press event. If I were, I would tell you that I hear you, and I agree. It's time to reject the debt ceiling scare tactics and address the truly frightening reality that our debt is at $14 trillion and growing. The debt ceiling vote will offer an opportunity that was squandered during the vote for the 2011 continuing resolution. Even as you gather in Washington today, bureaucrats are spending tax dollars to plant the roots of Obamacare and make it nearly impossible for us to stop this massive, job-destroying, budget-busting entitlement. Any vote on the debt ceiling must include a vote to fully defund Obamacare. To do less is to ensure that the next debt ceiling vote, the 75th increase in the last half century, will not be the last, and that is unacceptable. Thank you to the Tea Party for not giving up the fight. Your stubborn determination to return our country to its founding principles gives me great hope for conservative accomplishments in the current House of Representatives and for even greater victories in 2012. Again, that was Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann from Minnesota's 6th District. And now I'll turn it over to William Temple.
Good morning. I'm William Temple, and I play the part of Button Gwinnett, one of the first signers of the Declaration of Independence. First one on the left and the first one the British would have hung. And we do this colonial outfit to remind the current government of the first revolution. And we are in a revolution right now, the American people. When the Tea Party movement started in early 2009, I joined hundreds of thousands of others who, like our founding fathers and millions of U.S. citizens and soldiers who have gone before us, have taken up the fight for freedom over and over again. From my role as a founder of our local Tea Party group in the Golden Isles of Georgia, I eventually had the honor of literally leading the 2009 March on Washington with a fife and drum corps. 1.9 million of my fellow citizens as we marched in Washington against Obamacare and big government tyranny, which Obamacare represents. The first act of tyranny since the British were kicked out of this country on March 1st, 2010. Last December, I was elected by my fellow Tea Party leaders to chair the Tea Party National Convention this September in Kansas City, Kansas. In that capacity, I am in touch with virtually every one of the thousands of Tea Party cell group leaders across the country. I know how they think and feel, since they are the real grassroots folks that ride the buses 10 hours up here to D.C. and put their last paycheck to do it. But right now, we're very upset about those that we sent here in 2010, just last November, to serve us in the U.S. House. During the fall of 2010, the House Republican minority promised us $100 billion in cuts for the 2011 budget. Most of the huge House GOP freshman class, while they were candidates, also promised us they would not raise the national debt ceiling past the current cap of $14.294 trillion. Based on these promises, the Tea Party's 2010 efforts swept House Republicans into power, and everyone knows it, and John Boehner into the Speaker's chair. Yet we've been deeply disappointed. Instead of a fighter for U.S. taxpayers, Mr. Boehner has been a surrenderist, if that's a word, who waves the white flag before the first shots are fired, before the battle is even joined. Instead of delivering that $100 billion in promised cuts, Mr. Boehner opened his bidding at $35 billion, and yet actually obtained just $20 billion. Spit in the ocean, folks. Worth about 5 days' worth of U.S. borrowing. Why? Well, it seems House Speaker John Maynard Boehner and his fellow Rhino Republicans in name only love to spend other people's money just as much as the Democrats. Last year, the House Republican minority joined with the Tea Party to fight furiously against Obamacare. But once in power this year, Boehner's House Republican majority, after a hollow, purely symbolic repeal vote, have adamantly refused to use their genuine power to fix Obamacare, Medicare, Medicaid, or any of the other out-of-control entitlements and abusive Washington spending which threaten to bankrupt our nation and destroy our currency. Not even a question. Washington is borrowing 40 cents per dollar of federal spending, $4 billion per day, to bury our children beneath a smothering national debt, yet these wimpy House rhinos refuse to hide President Obama's MasterCard. Representative Paul Ryan, and we've all heard about his great budget, so-called courageous budget, adds $9 trillion to the U.S. debt and doesn't even get balanced until, get this, 2063. Well, I'm old enough already as Button Gwinnett, but I'll never see that happen. House Republicans hold in their hands a WMD, a weapon of mass discipline. If they would use it, All they need to do is lock arms and say, Mr. President, we're not even going to call a vote on raising the debt ceiling. We won't even think about unhiding your credit card until you have joined us in enacting bipartisan entitlement reform and fixing the Obamacare mess. That's what they should do. To wield this awesome weapon of mass discipline, House Republicans don't need to pass anything. They don't need the cooperation of Harry Reid, the Senate Democrats, or the President. All they need to do is nothing. Wouldn't that be lovely to have Congress do nothing? Just sit on their hands and refuse any vote to allow more borrowing beyond the current debt limit. The Tea Party plans to score just one vote in the U.S. House for purposes of candidate ratings this year. If you vote to raise the debt ceiling, you get a 0 for the year from the Tea Party. If you don't vote to raise the debt ceiling, you score 100 and you're a hero. Everything else, from votes on that budget to riders to repeals to trivial spending cuts, is just smoke and mirrors. This is your town. We will be judging the House Republicans and their Democrat colleagues on one issue only. Did you vote for more debt? That's it. Red ink requires pink slips. Federal layoffs and downsizing for D.C.'s ruling class, just like for all the rest of us out there. Yet Boehner aims to maintain full federal employment while the private sector bears the brunt of a Washington, Maine economic collapse. I wish our tearful House Speaker would just show some compassion for American taxpayers and our children, but he and Mr. Ryan have already surrendered to President Obama. It's a cowardly act of treason against coming generations, and we may be able to give Boehner something really to cry about in 2012. Today, rhino hunting season opens. And yes, I brought my musket, but you'll notice there's a flower in it. We weren't the ones that did $7 million damage in Wisconsin, by the way. To all Tea Partiers and voters, we say, stalk these pro-debt rhinos with phone calls, blog blasts, and picketing of their district offices. They'll vote for more debt without even demanding Obamacare's repeal. Obamacare must go. That's why the House is filled with Republicans now. But please, not the pretty flowers in the barrel of my musket. We're calling our Kansas event the Tea Party Woodstock Festival. We're urging nothing but peaceful, get that down, peaceful, nonviolent, yet relentless pursuit of all House Republicans who have gone wobbly in for more national debt. The Tea Party movement opposes any House GOP action on the debt ceiling, and we oppose more debt, the Tea Party. But because I know our people very well, I've marched with them, I've rallied with them all over, I think it's safe to say that the Tea Party movement as a whole might possibly, just possibly, forgive Boehner and the House Republicans a small bump in the debt ceiling. Heck, we might even forget to get our legislative scorecards printed. Now, how does that happen? If Obamacare is repealed beforehand, we might make a deal. 5 top market-oriented think tanks, including Heritage, CATO, American Enterprise Institute, and National Center for Policy Analysis, agreed on the top 10 things the House GOP needs to fix Obamacare. Yet Boehner and Ryan have simply ignored it all. Another if, we might be in the forgiving mood if the other health care entitlements of Medicare, Medicaid, and the U.S. tax code's medical inflation drivers get fixed beforehand. Everyone agrees, from the President and his deficit commission to conservative Republicans, that fixes are necessary. Duh. So why does Paul Ryan's budget delay these outflow fixes for a decade? Another if the only thing offered on the table to Obama Reid is a debt hike of $100 billion. Now, weren't we supposed to get that this year? $100 billion, not a penny more. That's the amount House leadership promised and later denied to the Tea Partiers in fiscal year 2011. If the president doesn't like it, let him figure out what to prioritize, and there's a lot he can prioritize, and what to cut when the cash starts running out. That figure also approaches the ballpark of a month's worth of U.S. borrowing, $100 billion, just a month's worth. It usually sets up another debt ceiling. It usefully sets up another debt ceiling. So after we allow a $100 billion cut, we'll meet with them again, and then we'll talk about the next $100 billion. If at least half of discretionary spending gets cut, most of it's either unconstitutional, unsustainable, silly, or evil. How can we tell future generations that we saddle them with trillions in debt for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, HUD, Planned Parenthood, National Public Radio, which is paid for by government funds, tobacco subsidies that cause cancer, and EPA CO2 regulation of human exhale? We're going to tell our grandchildren that. How can we tell our children that we dug their debt grave in order to hold official Washington harmless from the kind of layoffs that the private sector has experienced in a recession caused by Congress's banking and housing policies? And yet none of them are going home. How can we tell them that we kept on borrowing $4 billion per day in order to buy a third of the U.S. corn crop for ethanol subsidies that spike food prices for the world's poor? And if Boehner stops misleading, another if is if Boehner stops misleading House members and all America by echoing Treasury Secretary Geithner's default deceit. It's a lie, folks, when he tells them that House inaction on the debt ceiling equals default to federal bondholders. It's a lie. Because there is plenty of tax revenue to pay interest on T-bills, and Geithner himself is in charge of paying that interest. What Mr. Geithner really means when he says we will default on federal obligations is simply no more borrowed cash will be available for every kind of spending authorized by Republican polls who can't say no. And then another if. If Social Security's unfunded liabilities and those of the entitlement programs, including anti-marriage subsidies in U.S. welfare policy that fuel crime and other costly social pathologies, it's too much rum last night, social pathologies get addressed in advance. And then another if the House Armed Services Committee and the Pentagon slow down on injecting open homosexuality and females into forward combat roles. Is that necessary? When the Pentagon's own studies show that the military feminization may have an extremely costly impact on recruiting and retention, when Islamists have shown their willingness to sexually brutalize American female reporters, why would John Boehner's House Republicans be caving to political correctness? General, why would House Republicans who know better by fostering inappropriate attractions in the intimacy of tents, bunks, barracks, platoons, subs, tanks, convoys, cockpits, latrines, showers, toilets, and locker rooms when we are fighting wars in 3 Muslim nations? As a combat veteran, I know we don't have time to worry about the guy behind us. If a balanced budget amendment requiring a supermajority for tax increases passes the House and Senate for ratification by the states, and we're not going to hold our breath on that one, but we'd like to see it. And then finally, if Rhino House leadership starts following the bolder anti-debt examples of other Hill voices like Tea Party caucus leader Michelle Bachmann, freshman class chair Kristi Noem, Republican Study Committee Chair Representative Jim Jordan, and Senators Rubio, Paul, DeMint, Moran, Lee, Vitter, and Coburn, who have been talking tough or planning to filibuster against raising the debt limit. The Tea Party will not be in a forgiving mood this fall at the Tea Party National Convention in Kansas City. We're going to KC, not DC this year. Nor as the GOP primary season opens, if House freshmen and others elected by the Tea Party cave to Obama. We will find replacements for them this fall. Thank you.
Thank you, William. My name is Joseph Farah, and I've got a very brief statement. When the Republicans took over the House of Representatives in last November's election, I immediately began thinking what the new GOP majority could accomplish with control of only half of the Congress. Obviously, passing any meaningful legislation objectionable to the administration or Senate Democrats was out of the question. House Republicans could propose cutting the budget, but could never hope to persuade their counterparts in the Democrat-controlled Senate to go along with them, let alone the man in the White House. They could wrangle with Democrats and take symbolic action to demonstrate to the public there were real differences between the two parties. But at the end of the day, I could think of only two actions House Republicans could take that would allow them to assert themselves and impose their governing philosophy on the Senate and the White House. And those two actions are saying no to any proposed tax increase, because without their assent, there is no chance for Democrats to raise taxes, at least until 2013. The second was saying no to a hike in the debt limit. And in this case, without their assent, there is no chance for Democrats to continue business as usual or even implement programs such as Obamacare. In fact, it would require something Republicans have been calling for decades, dramatic cuts in the budget that would actually require Washington to return to something resembling limited constitutional government. But by January, only days after the Republican majority took over the House, as you've heard, leadership began issuing statements indicating the second of those two actions was off the table. John Boehner stated time and again since then that the debt limit had to be raised, had to be. Now, having spent a significant amount of time looking at the options of the House Republicans, I was initially mystified by Boehner's position, because in effect he was capitulating to business as usual in Washington. And I was naively, I think, sure he just hadn't thought this through properly. Didn't he understand the power he had in his hands? So I organized an innovative grassroots high-tech lobbying effort directed exclusively at House Republicans to persuade them to vote no on raising the debt limit, as so many of them had promised to do while campaigning for the fall election. And that is the No More Red Ink campaign, nomoreredink.com. And to date, it has delivered about 1 million hard copy letters to 241 House Republicans who have all the power they need to say no to more borrowing and spending. Now, I know this campaign has galvanized a lot of support among House Republicans because we've been doing head counts. I'm sure John Boehner's been doing head counts as well, but we've been doing them now for several months to see the changing votes. When we started the campaign in the beginning of February, I could only count about a half dozen House Republicans fully supportive of a no vote on increasing the debt limit beyond $14.3 trillion. Today, the vast majority of those House Republicans do, and we are approaching the necessary 218 votes to stop it cold. That's why I'm here today with my Tea Party friends to remind Republicans of why they were sent to Washington last November, and to warn them of the consequences of betraying their promises and their rhetoric to change the direction of Washington governance. If Republicans provide the votes necessary to continue the borrowing and spending madness we've seen over the last several years, they will be telling Americans effectively there is no alternative to the Democratic Party irresponsibility. They will be telling Americans representative government is dead. They will be telling Americans Republicans are all talk and no action. And they will be telling Americans that there is virtually no difference between the two parties. And they will be sealing their own fate in the 2012 elections. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Brian Wesbury. I'm